Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's In the Know podcast, where I'm delighted to have with me Brendan Frazier, the Chief Behavioural Officer at RFG and host of the Human Side of Money podcast. Brendan, a very warm welcome to you today.
Well, thank you for having me here. Thank you for letting me be here. As you were doing that, I was sitting here thinking, I haven't said this in a while, but I've said it in the past, I've said it before, and it still rings true. Something over the last couple of years, one of the coolest things about building this global audience is that I've been exposed to or had exposure and the pleasure of getting to meet and interact with a lot of advisors in the UK, which was never a thing prior to that. And I'm consistently impressed, consistently enjoy everyone that I interact with and come across with over there across the pond. So I know people are probably like, is he just saying that to butter us up right out of the gate? Like, nice work, nice move there, Brendan. But no, it's a thought that I've genuinely had multiple times, and maybe you'd say that that I'm getting the people who believe in the same things I do. So there's a little bit of selection bias there. That's certainly possible. But always been very, very impressed and enjoyed working with everyone I've ever interacted with over there.
Great. Well, I'll try not to let you down.
Yeah, no pressure.
We've got levels. So let me be honest with you from the off in terms of how I've come across you then, because there is a story and there was a reason why I wanted to get you on the podcast. So one of my previous guests a couple of months ago now, he's a financial planner. He's got a great story. I think we'd finished the podcast and we did the wrap up, off camera. And he mentioned a few people that have had an influence on him and how he works as an advisor. And your name came up. So when it came up, I thought, okay, fine. I'll link in, and I started to follow you. And then I quickly realized that you are one of the few people where you post something on LinkedIn and then it creates an emotional response from me. And when that happens, I'm thinking, right, okay, I need to get this guy on the show. I need to talk to him. So that's the reason. So that's how the conversation flowed. When I spoke to my guest, came to you and started to follow you and then thought, yeah, great. He's posting some really good stuff. And maybe it's because of my time of life, where I'm at and some of the decisions that I'm not making. And your posts resonate. And there's particularly one recently where, I don't know if you recall what it was, but it was like the grey shaded boxes. I think it was the Derek Haflin.
Yeah,
I
Derek
think.
Hagan's.
Yeah, that's it.
Derek Hagan's visual. Yep.
Yeah, that visual was really good because it just reminded me that all we have is now, and there's no guarantee for the future. So it's stuff like that that really gets me. So it's great to get you on the show today, Brendan.
Yeah, well, two things come to mind there. Number one is whoever that advisor was, you'll have to let me know after the show so they can send me an invoice and I can pay him and thank him for the shout out there.
Will do.
Second thing though is it's funny, like I'm glad that resonated with you, but that wasn't even my own work, right? Like I found that from somebody else, and Derek Hagan does. I mean, I get a lot of thoughts and ideas from him. He has this website called Meaningful Money and writes a newsletter and thinks a lot about this human side of money as well. I've had him on the podcast before. And so for those that are wondering what was this visual that could have been so powerful, it was basically this it was like a timeline, a box, let's call it like a long rectangle. And the long rectangle is representative of your life timeline. And then you go in and you shade in how far you live at this point. So if you think you live to be 90, and you're 45, you would shade in half of the box. But then you don't just stop there. You go in and put your spouse's timeline on there, and you line it up with yours. But then you put your kids on there, and theirs extends out further, and you realize like you're not going to be there for that much of your life. You put your parents' timeline on there right below yours, and you see how theirs ends a lot sooner than yours. You put your dog on there, and you're like, man, that's almost done. We're almost out of time, right? And so it's one of these things that we all know. Like we know this to be true. Like I'm not going to be around for my kid's entire life. My parents aren't going to be around forever. But we have this tendency, we all do. We have this tendency to just go through life on autopilot, where we know it to be true. We think, I should probably do something about it, or I know that's the case. But sometimes it takes framing it a different way or seeing it in a different way to force us to pause for a minute and be intentional and let it just hit and sink in differently. Right. And so I'll give you, so if you don't mind, I'll give you an example of like what that did for me as it relates to money. Right. So I saw the visual. I read the article. You wrote an article around it too, so we could probably link to that because it was a good article as well. But I saw the visual. I saw the part about. I saw my life. And I saw my parents' life. Which, by the way, let me add this too. If you think about these timelines that we just mentioned, these rectangular boxes, you've shaded in how far you've lived up to this point, but the rest that's not shaded in, none of that's even guaranteed, right? So it's like if you live, you're like all the way to 90 or 95, but you may, but you may not. It may not even be that long. So anyways, I was looking at the one for my parents, right? And I saw where it's like, man, they're like, right now, here's where my dad's at. Here, he's not going to be around much longer. By the way, he's 65, so he's not getting any younger. There's going to become a point where he can't do as much anymore. And so he and I have always talked about going on these baseball tours. They're called baseball tours, where you take like a week and you knock out as many stadiums as possible. And so I sat there and looked at it and was like, he doesn't have forever left. There's going to be a point when he's too old. He can't, like, he'll want to do it, but he won't enjoy it as much. Like, we need to figure out how to do this sooner than later, as soon as we possibly can. And so that night I went and pulled up and like the website for the tours that plan these things and sent it to him and said, hey, let's pick a date. Let's figure out when we can make it happen. And that's what I think about when I think about that. That's what I call, don't call it this, but that's what it looks like to be intentional or purposeful, but with both your life and your money. And sometimes it takes visuals like that, or something like that to get us to pause, and it hits in a different way and makes you really like be intentional, purposeful about what you're doing with your life and your money.
It was great. And, big shout out to Derek then for doing that. We'll leave some links in the description and the comments, but the two things it made me do is realize that I should be speaking to my mum and dad a lot more. So there we go. Yeah. So there was an action to that. And then my dog's getting older, and I thought, oh my God, I need to spend some quality time with my dog. So we go for 2 walks a day. So 2 actions from a visual rather than looking at a balance sheet or a spreadsheet. So that was a real positive for me.
It's funny you say that about the dog, because I've had the same thing happen in my life. It wasn't that visual, but I'll spare the long story and details, but I had a similar like clarifying aha, like stop you in your tracks moment with our dog, who was 9 at the time, is 10 now. And I had sort of like stopped taking him on these walks. And ever since I had that moment, we go on a walk every single night, even when I don't feel like it, because it's like the highlight of his day. And it's like, and I'm like, you know what? One day I'm going to wish that we could go on these walks, right? And it's not going to be possible anymore. And so there's still nights where I'm like, I really want to do this tonight. But I'm like, you know what? There's also, by the way, it's good for me too. But, and so that would never have happened if there wasn't some sort of, there's got to be a good name for it, but just like, stop you in your tracks, intentional moment to get clarity on what's truly important.
Yeah. It was a light bulb moment. Something happened.
Yeah. Okay. So there is a name for it. That's right.
There we go. Yeah. I put a copyright and trademark on that one. But anyway, it's great to get you on today. I guess I see a lot of you in terms of what you do now, the podcasting and what you're doing within sort of LinkedIn, etc. So I see all of that. But what I'm interested in is just to get to know a bit more about you and your background, because I'm interested in your backstory. How on earth did you get into financial services, financial advice? How did you get into this wacky world? Because not many people consciously choose to enter this sort of profession or industry. So I'm interested. I just want to learn more about you before you became a podcaster and working at RFG.
Yeah. For anybody that's wondering or listening and you want a good communication tactic to improve communication, to get people to open up and trust you and build conversational flow, anytime you ask someone to go back and tell you about themselves, particularly their past, it's a really easy and emotional thing to recall. And it's really good for people, getting people out of their head and into their heart to create good conversation. So I just want to highlight, first of all, that we can also learn something from this. So you asked me that question, and I can almost feel my brain over here literally lighting up, going, yes, I get to talk about myself. This is good. Now, the other side of me is going, Brendan's not concise with anything when it comes to words, and so I got to be careful as far as reeling this in and not taking the whole time talking about it. Okay, so I've always said I wish that I had a cool, much better story about how and why I got into the industry. The downside, the problem is that I don't. Now, I think it's similar over there like it is here. There's a lot of companies who will take the hire 10 and have 2 people stick approach. Like, we're going to hire all these people, get them to sell some products. If they stick, great. If not, like, there's no skin off of our back, essentially. So we're going to hire essentially salespeople. Well, coming out of college, I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. And so I was trying to figure that out. Had a couple of these financial services companies that were, they essentially painted the dream, right? They're like, hey, you come, you work here, you work hard for a few years, and eventually, a few years down the road, you're making all this money and you have your control of your own schedule. And so I'm sitting there like, yeah, you know what? That sounds great. Plus, with an athlete background, I've always prided myself on working hard. So I'm like, yeah, I don't mind. I'll work hard. Well, so that's kind of what drew me into the industry. So I took a job where I was going to be building a financial advice practice. Well, at that point, it would have just been an insurance business. The short version of the story is my wife and I decided we were like, hey, we may want to move at some point. She's from Nashville. We were in Nashville. We didn't know if we wanted to be there forever. This is 14 years ago now. And so back then, like, the idea of a virtual business wasn't really much of a thing. Like, I'm sure it existed, right? But it wasn't like people didn't really do it. And so it's like, well, I don't want to start building a client base in Nashville if we're just going to up and move and then have to go like meet new people and sell insurance in another state, right? So I thought, all right, maybe I'll wait and come back to this. Well, in the meantime, I found a company called Jackson who consults with financial advisors in the retirement income space. And that was like my real entry into the world of financial advice. And in hindsight, it was great because I didn't have to worry about building a client base. And at the same time, it was sort of an accelerant for my learning curve because I wasn't stressed about building a client base, but I was still able to learn the ins and outs of the industry while talking with advisors who have been doing it for years to learn what they do, how they do it, what they know. I could learn from them. And so in hindsight, I think it was great for my learning trajectory to have a different course like that. So that's what ultimately got me in was the appeal of, oh yeah, control my schedule, make a lot of money. That's great. And then my wife being like, hey, I don't know if we want to be in Nashville forever. And I needed to find a job. I was already licensed and everything. So I pivoted to this job in Nashville, consulting with advisors, which was still in financial services. And we never ended up even moving, by the way. So, but everything happens for a reason. And that's kind of how it happened. It's not a great story. In fact, sometimes I wonder, like, should I add a little color to that, make up a few things here and there? But that's just the truth.
Be authentic, be real. Okay, yeah. So you're still in Nashville. And what about kids, etc.? You obviously mentioned a dog, so have you got the kids as well?
Yep, we got 2 kids, 2 boys. So constant chaos. They're about to be 6 and 4, and then potentially a third one on the way. I'm not sure if we know what we're doing there, but meaning like I think we might be losing our minds. But that's in the works at the moment.
Okay, I'll leave that there. There. Good luck on that one. Okay.
Yeah.
And how did you find yourself going to RFG? What's the story there?
Yeah, so to understand that, you have to go back a couple of years prior to RFG. So I was building an advisory business, being an advisor, doing that whole thing, and then at the same time had started the podcast. Right, so the human side of money, the podcast. Essentially, I was like, hey, there's this whole human element out there that we all know about, we all acknowledge, we all say that it exists, right? And I would have advisors tell me all the time. Sometimes I feel like more of a therapist than an advisor. I feel like I'd be better off with a degree in psychology than a degree in accounting or finance or economics or whatever. And I would always think like, yeah, that makes sense. And everybody says it. So I think it's true, but nobody really knew what to do about it. And nobody said like, yeah, I went and got my trainings and designations for my technical knowledge. And then I went and learned the human side. It's like, we didn't really know what to do. But so I was endlessly fascinated by that aspect of like, I would much rather read an article about how to apply psychological principles to the financial planning work that we do than I would how to minimize taxes. But and I would force myself to do both, but I would always find myself wanting to read the one about people and psychology. So I sort of said, all right, the answers to how to do this human thing are out there. They're just not filed under financial services. They're in other fields like behavioral change, behavior science, therapy, communication skills. Like they're out there. So I sort of went on this mission to figure out how do we bring it back to and apply it as easily as possible to financial planning and advice. And so that's where the podcast idea was born from. And I figured I was just going to have conversations with awesome, insightful people, hopefully learn a lot. If nothing else, worst case scenario, I would learn a lot that I could take and use in the work that I was doing. Best case scenario, it takes on a life of its own. Turns out there are actually other people that are interested in this stuff, and see where it goes from there. And so fast forward, the podcast started almost to the date 4 years ago. So that's about 4 years ago. Fast forward about 2 years later, and this is 2022, and it's like, oh, hang on. Like, this is sort of taking on a life of its own. There are people that are interested. I'm not the only one who wants to know this stuff. And so that led to creating some content, but also some courses and trainings for advisors and their firms on how to embed and apply the human element in the financial planning process. And so I did that for a couple of years, kept doing the podcast, and then RFG came along. They're an RIA firm, an independent firm here in the U.S. where they're looking to grow. We're looking to grow, still getting used to that, looking to grow, looking to make a difference, looking to be different as a platform to attract advisors. And RFG, we fully believe in the future of advice being at the intersection of technical knowledge and the human element. And so they said, hey, we want a chief behavioral officer. Are you interested? And the rest is history.
So how did you know it was the right position for you then? Because this is my recruitment background. I'm always interested in why people take opportunities, whether it's an intuitive feeling and they look at everything else in terms of the role, etc. But how did you know it was the right role for you?
So that's a great question. The reason why I say it's a great question is because I've done so much reflection on that I feel like I've got all these thoughts bottled up that I'm happy to share. And then I'm like, all right, but how much is too much? Not how much is too much, but it's like, do people really care? But with your recruitment background, that's a good point. You'll understand this. So a lot of factors went into it. I really enjoyed what I was doing on my own. Like, I was running my own business, didn't have to answer to anybody, could do whatever I wanted. Was on a good trajectory, and had a few of these opportunities come along from other firms. Like, hey, we want to bring you in and acquire what you've done and your knowledge and your blah, blah, blah. And it was always kind of like, no, I'm okay. No, I'm okay. Ultimately, just to kind of like not go on and on, but try to boil it down to the main reasons, it came down to two things. One is that I was going to be able to continue doing all of my favorite things that I currently do or did prior. For example, the podcast, speaking, and then like newsletter content. So like those are my three favorite things that I did, and were sort of like, I don't think I would ever want to give that up. Got to continue doing those. And then at the same time, I was running my own business, but I had done a training with a friend. Her name's Megan Lurt. Some people listening have probably heard. She used to write for the Kitsis platform. We were working together on building and delivering this training, and I realized I had forgotten how much I enjoyed working with other people, and like the synergy that comes with it, the energy, how much more you can get done. And so I was enjoying doing my own thing. There's a lot of pros to that, but I had sort of lost sight of how fun it is to build something with other people. And that became more and more of I need this. I think I need more of this in my life. And so it was sort of like a collision of all these things at the same time, where it was like, I'd been thinking about that. They came along. And then last thing I'll say, which is really, really important, I guess, that's less focused on me, is it was really important for me to find a philosophical, cultural fit. So like I did as much due diligence as I could on the culture and the philosophy of the firm and what it was like to work there, and really tried to make sure like the job was great. The role was what I was looking for, but you can have a great job and not in the right environment, it's not going to be great. So I really did a lot of due diligence on that, and that part checked out as well. It's funny I mentioned that last. That was probably the most important. The first thing I started with was trying to get a feel for the culture. Philosophically, what do they believe? Are we going to see eye to eye? Or do they embrace ideas and innovation and change and all that kind of stuff?
Great. That's a great story, actually. And I just want to take you back a little bit. And you're saying, a little bit on reflection. Have you thought why you're interested in the human side of money and that side, the emotional side, rather than just the facts and the figures.
I've thought about it some, not a lot. As you say that, I'm like, that's a good question. And I don't know. But what I do know is that it's always been the case. Like I've always been fascinated by like not just psychology, but just even like social experiments, why people do what they do. Like some of my favorite books have always been those that talk like The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell, where it's like these products or these ideas took off. And my mind's just always so curious, like why did those work when they shouldn't have worked? Or like Jonah Berger wrote a book called oh man, now I'm gonna forget what it's called. That's embarrassing. But it was essentially the same thing on like how to understand why people do what they do, why certain products work and other products don't. Anyway, so I don't know why. It's a good question. I should probably reflect a little bit more on why that is. I just know that it's kind of always been that way.
Yeah, I get that. I understand that because I work in recruitment. You know, we work both in the UK and the US, and I just enjoy working with people and understanding people. And when I go on holiday or I'm in the train station or I just like to socially observe and look at what people are doing. And I just find it fascinating rather than looking at facts and figures. I find that human side just compelling. It attracts me. And I want to know, why did you do that? Or why didn't you do that? I just find it more interesting than perhaps the other side, where some people may find that interesting, which is fine. But for me, it's just that human side and the behaviors around that.
Yeah, I everything you said resonates. I totally get it and understand it. And the funny thing is, at the same time, I actually still really like and enjoy and know how important like the numbers side is. I do like to be analytical a lot of times as well, and like run numbers and calculations and projections, but it's just not as interesting and fun for me.
No, certainly not for me either. And I run a business and I should do it a lot more.
Yeah.
I do it, in case my staff are listening. I do it all the time just to check out how well they're doing or not. Let's talk about the human side of that financial advice, because I read a lot about your posts, and there's the theme that is it resonates with me. It's about building trust. And I think that's, really important about building trust. And I just want to know if, from an advisor's perspective, how do they go about building trust with, let's say, new clients? If they're prospecting or going in to see a new client, because, advisors do that, obviously. But I think it's interesting. So, your advice, your secret sauce, building trust, what some techniques can advisors use?
Yeah. So that whole, how do you build trust, accelerate trust? Obviously, we know that trust is pretty much a prerequisite for success, or it's like at the core, it's the foundation for success in this business, because you're most likely you're not going to be able to get prospects to become clients if they don't trust you. Maybe you do. Maybe they don't have any other option, so they become a client. Well, then the problem isn't getting them to become a client. At that point, the lack of trust shows up with lack of follow through, lack of implementation, lack of doing the things that you recommend. So you got to have trust. It's at the core of success in this business. And the one thing that always, I don't know if it bothered me, but that stuck out to me was, even early on in this business, you would always hear people say, they would talk about the importance of building trust and rapport. And they'd say things like, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And that is true. But I remember sitting there one day, like in a training session, thinking to myself, right, but like, what are the best ways to actually do that? Or how do I actually do that? And sure, I'm not like, I don't have my head's not buried in the sand. There are obvious, you kind of know how, but I remember thinking like, there's got to be like actual research-backed, evidence-based ways to consistently build and accelerate trust. And why are we not learning how to do that? Why are we just saying do it instead of learning how? And it's like, go build rapport. And so then what most of us do is we go in, we're like, so how are things in the UK? Oh yeah, how long have you lived there? What's the weather like there? Right? And like those aren't bad things. Right? Those aren't necessarily negative or detrimental, but they're not trust builders, right? And you're not really like, maybe you're building some rapport, but you're not building a lot of trust. And I think anybody listening, myself, I've experienced this myself. I think most people listening can probably think back to a time where they had like a really good conversation or seemed like a really good conversation with a prospective client, where you're talking about, oh yeah, your kids go to this school, my kids go there. Or you're a fan of this team, yes sir. We love going on vacation there too. And you're like, oh man, I'm knocking out of the park with this rapport thing, and then you never hear back from them. And it's like, it's probably because we didn't know exactly how to build the trust that we need with prospects to move forward and become clients. So, how do you do it? I mean, we could probably do a couple hours on this, but there's a quick way to think of it. I call it the dynamic duo of building trust. And they're really one thing, but you can separate them out into two, but it's asking great questions and then listening with empathy and curiosity. And at the core of all of that is trust isn't built by, actually, this is a quote from Bill Bacharach. Trust isn't built by telling your story. It's built by listening to theirs. Like we love people, like I said earlier, people love talking about themselves. We know from research that if you can get somebody talking about themselves, it lights up the same area of the brain as eating chocolate and engaging in sexual activity. And if you don't know, I don't know how you feel about either one of those. Just know that the vast majority of people around the world, it really enjoy both of those things, and because it lights up the pleasure reward center of the brain. And so that's one way. That's one way to do it, is get people them talking about themselves, right? Get them to open up, start talking. And to do that, you've got to ask great questions. But then where you can really like accelerate it is when it comes to the listening side and demonstrating that you're actually listening, that you do care, that you want them to continue, that you want to know more, that you're genuinely curious in what they have to say. There's a book that's behind me right now. You can't see it. It's called You're Not Listening by Kate Murphy. And they went and they asked people, how many people do you have in your life that are like, that truly listen to you? And most people said none. Like right around half said none.
Wow.
A few people said one, and then half of the rest said one, half of the rest said two. The numbers are probably a little bit off. The gist of it was this: most of us don't have somebody in our life that's really, truly a great listener. If we do, it's like one or two people, and it almost always is like a family member or a really close friend. So people that we inherently like trust, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of like, I'm not saying you have to be as close as a family member or best friend with your clients. If that's how you like to run things, that's great, but not everybody likes that. But if you can demonstrate that you're listening, if you can listen and be curious and be somebody that makes them feel heard and understood, you elevate yourself to the same level of trust that they have with, or at least near, we'll say close, that they have with their good friends and family members. And so it's a skill set that can be honed, but it ultimately comes down to, how do I ask great questions to get them open up, talk, make them feel heard and understood, and then demonstrate that I'm listening with empathy and curiosity so that they feel like they're safe opening up and telling me these things.
I was having a conversation, name drop, with George Kinder on the podcast, and we were talking about listening. And I think it's something I have struggled with in the past, truly listening. Because your mind, or my mind, is always racing on to the next thing, or I've got to do this, I've got to do that. Even when you're doing a podcast, you're conscious about questions, you're trying to link it, you're looking after the time, you just want to make sure that everything's okay. And I asked George, I said, how can you do that? And the first, as in how can you improve listening? The first thing he said, go on his course. Betcha. Yeah, nice one.
I'm sure that actually probably does help. To be fair, I'm sure it does help, but maybe mention that second. But anyways, go ahead.
No, he's a good guy, so absolutely, and I laughed about that. And the second thing, it can be learned. It can be learned. You just have to keep practicing it. But it just seems weird that you cite that reference where very few people listen. I'm interested. Why do you think that is? Why do you think we're not geared up to listening as much as we could and should do?
Yeah. So, well, first of all, it surprises me to say that you struggle with listening, because in our interactions thus far, it feels like you do a really good job listening. Why is that? I mean, so I'm no expert in this, right? But like, if you read enough, look around enough, and also just like some of it's intuitive. Well, part of the reason is that listening's actually really hard. It takes up a lot of, when you do it right, you do it well, it takes up a lot of mental energy. You have to like be very intentional and focused, and it can be sort of draining. So it's easier for us and it's easier for the brain not to listen. Number one. Number two is listening also involves like letting go of control and allowing some uncertainty into the conversation, right? If you're just thinking about what I'm going to say next, you're still in control of the conversation. Third thing would be, like I just said, talking about yourself and talking actually feels good to the brain, and the brain's always going to default to the things that feel good. And then I think the last one that comes to mind right away anyways is that we live in an endless world, a world of endless distractions.
Yeah.
Right? So like there are no shortage of things to take our attention away from listening to somebody, right? Like, I mean, so anytime I have a meeting or do something like this, I put my phone on do not disturb. The only person that can get through is my wife or our kids' school. And then I always tell my wife, hey, I have this from this time to this. If you're calling, it needs to be for an emergency, right? So like my mind's not even on the phone. In fact, I guess this just came to my mind. There's a study that was done that essentially showed that the mere presence of a phone on the table in a conversation impacted the quality of the conversation. Not using it, but just seeing it and having it there. So anyway, so there's distractions. Like what's on, as I'm sitting here, what else is on my computer screen? Are notifications popping up? It can even be things like how there are papers spread across my desk that are just sitting there reminding me of all the things that I need to do later. I mean, there's, and I'm sure somebody could come on here like Kate Murphy or somebody who's like the true expert in this and probably tell us all the other reasons why in our mind it's just really hard to do. But it is really hard to do. And it's like, it goes back to what we were talking to earlier. To actually do it and do it well, you really have to be intentional about, like, if you just stroll into a conversation without any thought, right? So let's say you're on the phone, you hang up, you just go to the next conversation. Odds are you're not going to listen very well, because unless you just really hone the skill, odds are you're not, because you're not in the right mind space. You're not being intentional, thinking I'm going to go into this conversation being curious and listening, and you'll just default to what's easy and comfortable and feels good to the brain, which is talking. Which, by the way, that's one of the weirdest things about hosting a podcast and then going on other podcasts. Like I'm getting to do the part where I sit here and talk the whole time, and it feels so weird because I'm used to asking the questions. But like right now, it's like this feels so good. I just get to sit here and talk about all this.
Good. We'll just carry on. We'll keep riffing. No, it's great to get a guest like this anyway. And I think the best podcasts are the ones where the guests do most of the talking anyway, because they're engaged and the audience want to listen to the guests. They don't want to listen to me as much. Surprisingly, I don't know why. I just want to go back on trust, because when I was formulating that question. And I'm totally with you, by the way. I totally get it about trust and, asking those questions and getting people to open up. If that's the case, then why do we also fall into the trap of trusting scammers and online influencers, or finfluencers, as they're called? Do you know what I mean? The people are out there on doing you could be a millionaire, buy some crypto, buy some gold, etc. And that's it. And people will just think get rich quick and off they go, because I'm the believer in trust, and you've got to build that, and you've got to sort of build the empathy with an individual and think, yes, I'm going to make that decision. But so many times you hear these horror stories where people just go full in and spend thousands of dollars and then they don't even know a person. And that's the other part of me thinking, well, why is that then?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And a few things come to mind there. Like, that's not trust that comes from necessarily, anyway, like a one-on-one interaction, right? So like if we're thinking about, if you're mentioning like when you go online and you see these scams or these schemes, or you see these influencers with bad information, like the people that are out there talking about how whole life is or life insurance is the greatest investment vehicle of all time, and you're like, how in the world are they getting people to believe that? That's a different trust factor, different way to build trust than if you're meeting individually with somebody in a room or virtually online, where it's a personal interaction. And so in environments like that, where we're like, our brain's trying to decide, can I trust this person? We often default to we default to a few things. But in the book Influence by Robert Cialdini, he talks a lot about these things, these factors that we use as shortcuts to determine, for decision making, but also, do we trust people? So like you hop on there and you see that somebody's online and they're a finfluencer and they've got 1 million followers. Part of our brain goes, well, I mean, if 1 million people, it's called social proof. If 1 million people are following then like there must be something to it. Surely he hasn't fooled a million people, he or she. Or like there's a bunch of likes on the post, or it's really easy, by the way, if you do it well, to like demonstrate authority and knowledge in a domain like that. You can say things that sound really, really good and true, and you've got all these other people that are following them and like them. And by the way, if we picked one and we went and looked at it, like we went and looked at the person, I'm sure they do things in the way that they present information or present themselves that are also like real people in. Like they do, like I can't think of a good example, but like that generally those people know what they're doing.
Yeah, they know what they're doing.
Know how to reel people in and build trust. And it's unfortunate, right? It's unfortunate that it's not just based on logic and facts and reason, but I think it's an important lesson for us to learn, right? Like we can let these people go out there and use these forces for evil, or we can we can embrace the fact that that's the case, that it exists, and then figure out how do we harness the same thing for good? How can we use the same factors, the same psychological forces for the better, instead of letting somebody just do it to harm people?
Yeah, that's a good answer. I find it interesting. And one final point on trust. So I recently ran a poll in the UK asking my network whether or not there was a trust issue within financial advice, certainly in the UK. And I think it came out that it's either 63 or 65% still believe there is a perception of mistrust amongst financial advisors, which I found quite interesting because my peer group, other business owners, they're always asking me to recommend some good financial advisors. So from a US perspective, what do you think with regards to the perception of trust? Do the US people trust financial advisors? Do you think more so than the ones in the UK?
It's interesting you bring this up because I don't remember when this was. Maybe it was a year ago. One of the advisors from the UK that was in one of my programs mentioned that he feels like there's more of a lack of trust around advice in the UK. I've had multiple advisors in the UK who've mentioned to me, they say something like the UK is just a little bit behind the US as far as like the advice industry, the profession goes, which I'm not entirely sure is as true as people think that it is. But anyway, that's just speculation.
I think we like to say that amongst, against anything with the US. We always say, when you get the weather, we get the weather 7 days later. I think there's that sort of habitual, sort of typical answer that we're always a little bit behind the US.
That's interesting. I bet that could be the case because it's never as glaring of a gap or difference as it is perceived to be. I don't think, anyways. But anyways, all that to say, the level of adoption of financial advisors in the U.S. is higher than the UK. Now, what I don't know is what do the statistics say around do people in general trust, and how do we compare that to the UK? I do know that the level of adoption is higher in the U.S. and I wish I had the specific numbers. It was enough to kind of be like, oh, that's interesting. It wasn't like a really small minor difference. So I don't know if the trust factor is different. Here's what I do know though, is that so Herman Brody was on the podcast. He was episode 107. He wrote a book called The Trust Mandate, and he said that part of trust, there's the interpersonal role trust, like the advisor trust, but there's also above that, not more important, but another layer of it is industry level trust. And so that it's certainly a thing and it's certainly a factor. At the end of the day, what I would say though is the only trust that we can really control day in and day out is the trust that we exude and create amongst people. And whether you're in the US or the UK, like it's still a human being, and trust is still built and accelerated much the same way regardless.
Yeah. No, that's a very good point. So once the trust has been built and you having client interaction, and this is probably very typical now of me in my life, so this is why I'm asking this question. What's the secret to getting your clients to make that decision, which is in their best interest? Because I tend to procrastinate quite a lot. So I will know what the logics and the facts should tell me what to do, right? So I can see it, but then there will be something which is preventing me from doing it. And I look at him thinking, what is that? So I then internalize it and go through that process. What's stopping me from taking that next step? I think I don't think, by the way, I'm sort of unique in that I think there's many people like me, but I'm interested to get your views on this, because this is something that you post a lot on. So how can we get those people like me to actually take action?
This is what's known in the industry as the behavior gap. So it's this idea of like, and it's funny to me when you think of it like this. You go, hey, I'm meeting with somebody, a person, a couple, and they're here, and I guess I'm using my hand visual, and it's not great for a podcast. So like they're where they are today, and they've laid out where they want to be 5 years from now, for example, right? They've told you their goals, what they want to do with their money. We're here today. We want to be here in 5 years, and you sit there and you go, okay, great. Your expertise is to show them, hey, to get from where you are financially today to where you want to be, here are the steps that you need to take to get there. You need to do these 3 things, these 5 things, and we'll put you on a path to get there in 5 years. And it's really, really fascinating and frustrating at the same time that you could show somebody exactly what to do to put them on a path to get to where they want to go, and then they don't actually do it. Right? You're kind of sitting there going, wait a minute. I showed you what to do, but you're not actually following through. And anybody that's worked in this business long enough and worked with human beings long enough knows that that's a thing, that it's hard to get people to actually change their behavior for the better. I mean, and this happens in the medical field all the time. Like patients with heart attacks, they'll say, hey, if you don't want to have another heart, this is the very short version of this. I use this as an example in some of my presentations, but they'll say, hey, if you want to avoid coming back in for another surgery, if you want to avoid another heart attack, you have to change your lifestyle. You have to eat less, eat healthier, exercise more, not smoke. And then they follow up with these patients 2 years later, and 90% of them haven't changed their lifestyle. Or this is in the U.S. too, but the doctors will prescribe medicine, and half the people don't actually even fill their prescription, and then half of those don't even follow through with the regimen. And I point that out to say this, that if changing behavior and doing the things you're supposed to do is hard, in a matter of, when it comes to your health or in a matter of life and death, we sort of have to we have to shift and change our expectation to say we should probably assume that it's going to be hard to do some of these things that we're asking people to do. Maybe we should assume that they're not going to follow through, that they're not going to implement, and then ask ourselves, what are the things we can do to help them change their behavior for the better? And I point that out to say, first and foremost, it's not the most fun explanation. Everybody always wants to know, like, what do I do to improve implementation? But the first thing you have to do, I think, is shift your mindset and go, I can't just expect to tell somebody what to do and give them 5 action items and assume they're going to come back and knock it out in a month and have it done. So first of all, there's a reframing that goes on. Second of all, I'll give the most, instead of going through it all, what are some of the things you can do that are most practical, maybe the easiest to do? So to change behavior, first and foremost, it has to be client inspired. Yeah. Like client inspired advice, not advisor driven. The best ideas, this goes for all aspects of life. The best ideas are never your ideas, it's their ideas. Like people always believe that their ideas are the best. It's why when sometimes I'll go to my wife and be like, hey, babe, I just had this thought. What if we do this? And she'll be like, I said that 2 months ago. And I'm like, yeah, okay, right. 2 months ago, it wasn't my idea. It was your idea. But now that it's in my brain, it feels brilliant. It's the same exact idea. So first of all, clients need to have they need to have autonomy, right, to believe that to make it their idea, because when it's their idea, they believe it's their idea, they're more motivated to move forward. So there's a number of ways to do it. That can even be as simple, though, as asking the question, hey, after everything we've talked about, what do you want to prioritize first? What do you want to knock out first? They pick what's most important. And then, by the way, because they're doing what they think is most important, they're more likely to do it. And then you've created more momentum to do other things. Once you check one thing off the list, you're more likely to do the next few. That's one. Second thing is oftentimes we don't have the confidence to do what we're supposed to do, right? Like I know that, here, I'll give you an example from this morning. I was working out. They were talking about how a couple of the guys they were talking about how there's this new diet online where it says all you have to do to get in shape is eat 6 eggs a day and an orange. And it's like,
okay,
right, like you will lose weight if you eat 6 eggs and an orange. But guess what's not going to be very possible? Is to just eat 6 eggs and an orange. It's like that makes sense, but it's not really doable. So anybody that dives, you give someone that recommendation, they're not going to feel confident they can go through an entire day eating 6 eggs and an orange. But if you can, you're definitely going to lose weight. So we have to make sure that our clients are confident that they can do what we ask them to do. So as you look at this, scale of 1 to 10, how confident do you feel that you could implement this? Last thing is, for right now, is making sure to always connect back the plan or the recommendation to the purpose or the emotional driver behind it. We tend to think when somebody tells us, hey, I want to make sure that I take care of my granddaughter down the road. And when we come back in the U.S., I guess I don't know a ton about estate planning in the U.K. In the U.S., we have this vehicle called a revocable trust. And so you could say, hey, I'm recommending this revocable trust because it's easier administratively and it's going to avoid probate for your granddaughter. And that's true, and that's good. Right? But if you say, hey, we're recommending this revocable living trust to make it easier for your granddaughter down the road, to accomplish your goals for her down the road, those are two different things. And we assume that, hey, they told me that this is for their granddaughter's legacy, right? So I'll just tell them we're going to do this for this reason. But that connection's not always in their mind. You have to reconnect, hey, here's what we're recommending, and tie it or connect it to the emotional driver behind why you're recommending it. And when you can create that emotion and ignite motivation through emotion, you're more likely to get somebody to follow through and do what they're supposed to do. So there's more things you can do, but those are the 3 things. You got to give autonomy. You've got to make sure they're confident, and then you want to make sure that there's connection between the plan and the reason why they're doing it.
Do you know what? That's great advice. Thank you for that. So that's really helped me. And I think where I'm at, and many other clients as well, I think it's the emotional connection I'm lacking in terms of being able to visualize what it looks like. So I need to have those conversations. I need to be able to articulate what it looks like, which aligns with me, because that will then help me make those decisions and put those actions into practice.
Well, so this just came to mind too, but oftentimes one of the main culprits of changing behavior is lack of clarity. So like you can know kind of vaguely what you want to do, but the more clarity you can inject, the more likely you are to do it. So you could say, I need to eat healthier, right? Or I'm going to eat more protein. But anytime you have a thought like that or a goal like that, the more clarity you can provide, the more likely you are to follow through. So it's like, I need to eat healthier. So for breakfast, I'm going to have oatmeal with blueberries and strawberries. For lunch, I'm going to have grilled chicken and broccoli. And for dinner, we're going to have whatever it is for dinner. I ran out of examples because I'm not that good at but you get the point, right? It's like,
I get it.
Inject clarity, and then you'll be amazed at how more clarity leads to more results.
No, again, I think that's really helped me, and I hope my advisor's not going to listen to this because it's almost like he's not doing his job properly. But I think, well, to be fair, and I've known my advisor for many years, and I think he knows me extremely well. But I do think sometimes that advisors are still very much into the mechanics of advice to reduce my liabilities, my tax liabilities, build up my pension fund, make it a spread of risk. It's very, how can I put it? They're very functional, and I get that, but it's not. I'm purpose led. My business is purpose led. I know what I want to achieve, and I need to align it around that rather than I'm going to retire at 65 and do it. That's not going to happen for me. That isn't where I want to take my business. So I need to reframe it. I need to have those internal conversations. So I really get it though.
To be fair, like that's how I would say the vast majority of advisors operate and still operate, because that's what we've been known and taught and trained, right? And so there's nothing wrong with that. By the way, you have to have the technical chops.
You need the mechanics.
The mechanics are 100% necessary, but in service of what? So you want to have the mechanics, but in service of helping fuel the purpose of how you want to live your life. So the way I always say it is that money is just a tool to fund the life you want to live. I'm going to be the expert at the financial levers to pull to make that happen, but I don't know what levers to pull until I know what I want what you want your life to look like. What does this life look like? How do we craft that? And then we can pull the levers, the mechanical levers, to make it happen.
Yeah, sure. And I guess the final point on this topic is we've done the trust, we've done the intro bit, meeting a prospect, client, etc., building up that trust. We've had now the discussion around taking action, and I think you've been posting recently about client reviews as well, how they should change. And I think I've seen a couple of posts. But again, when it comes to client reviews, what should advisors be doing more of?
Yeah. I keep saying this, but again, another good question. I probably think it's a good question because it's things that I love to talk about, right? So, I guess I would put it like this. If you're sitting there thinking, I know there's a lot of advisors that think like, so I've had these clients that I've worked with for a while. We do these reviews, annual, biannual, and generally speaking, they come in and it'll be like, hey, how are things going? How's the family? Been on any trips recently? Any updates that are going on? Okay, great. Well, here's where you're at. You're on track. Everything looks good. And you kind of go and you go on your way. Right? And like I've said this multiple times, I'm going to say it again. That's not bad. In fact, there is value in that. Right? They at least they walk away with the reassurance that, hey, I went in for a checkup. I'm still on track. Everything looks good. There's a lot of emotional value in doing that. But I think the question we need to ask ourselves is, can we do more? Are there other things that we could be doing aside from just providing this like annual reassurance? And so if you think about the life cycle of a client, so Megan Lertz came on, the reason why this has been coming up, she and I talked about this for a while, this idea of a rediscovery meeting to keep clients engaged. But by the way, there's a 7-year itch with marriages. There's a 7-year itch with client retention, right? Like we assume we know people better than we do, and because we've been with them for so long. So from the client retention perspective and keeping them engaged, we started thinking, hey, how can we do rediscovery meetings? And typically the client life cycle goes, they come in as a prospect, they have things to fix. You get to fix those things. You spend 1, 2, maybe 3 years fixing their situation, and then they become fine, right? Like they're okay. They're good to go. They'll say, hey, we're okay right now. We don't really need anything. And then maybe something pops up in life and you have to fix it again. But sometimes if you're not careful, like you go while in fine mode. Right? So Megan's idea, the way she frames it is like, we need to help. We need to go from fix to fine to flourish. So how can we say, hey, now that we've taken care of the problems that you had, we've got you set up financially, things are fine, what else is possible? What are the things we could do to take you from like everything's fine to think bigger about how could you be using money to live the life that you want to live? And so instead of just going through a regular review meeting where you do a checkup and everything's fine, you get intentional about asking questions like, hey, we've done all this work. Everything looks really, really good. If you're up for it, I'd like to just take a minute and think and start considering like what could be possible now. Right? You're on track. You told me you want to retire at 65. We're on track for that. Keep doing what you're doing. We've protected against it in case things go wrong. And instead of just going on cruise control, let's think about what are some other things you could be doing. What are some of the possibilities? What's something you've always wanted to do that you've never done before? What's something you did in the last 6 months that you look back on and you go, that was awesome. We need to do more of that. What's something, my wife and I did this recently. We said, what's something we've done in the last 6 months where we would 10x our spending on it without blinking, right? And 10x is, I don't know if we would actually, but the exercise was like the point, right? Like, I don't know if we would actually 10x, but what's something where we'd say we would just more than double our spending and we wouldn't even blink, right? And it's just it's sitting there saying, hey, let's reimagine what's possible to help you live your best possible life, to align money with the life that you want to live, because we're not fixing anything right now. So let's set something up. And then the best part for people that love the mechanical side of advice is you create something that you get to fix again or go back into the mechanics of it. So if the idea is, I'm going to take my family on this 2-week vacation to Italy where we do cooking classes and go out on a boat for a few days, then all of a sudden you now have something new to help plan for, to incorporate into the plan, to figure out and solve how to make that happen. And that's a pretty simple calculation, I think. But you're continuing to add value and show how you can continue to add value, continuing to engage, and then continuing to build the relationship on an ongoing basis. And then selfishly, from an advisor standpoint, I know a lot of us feel this way. I always felt this way. Review meetings can get a little bit boring and mundane, especially when it's with the same people over and over again. And so as one advisor told me, she said that I needed to add some zest back into my meetings because they felt so mundane, and it like reignited her excitement for her review meetings.
That's really interesting. And I guess just listening to what you said, I'm intrigued. What did you and your wife decide on you would 10X? What was the answers when you went through that process?
Concerts. So we went back and every time we go to a concert, we love it. We enjoy it. We always say we should do more of it. And so, we went back and said, all right, let's go see who's coming. We're in Nashville, so we get a lot of shows. We said, all right, let's look who's coming, and then let's book it without blinking, because that's something that we know that we love doing together. We enjoy the experience. We're creating memories. And so we went to a Chris Stapleton concert like 3 weeks ago. And it was a no-brainer decision because we sat there and intentionally thought, like, what's something that we want to do more of?
Excellent. Okay. Are you okay for a couple of minutes, Brendan?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I just want to sort of end topic. I'm going to get you into a time machine. Okay. Hop on with me. Let's go for it. I've just built one.
Let's do it.
Me and Elon. So the question I've got for you is, where do you see advice or the significant changes in the advice sector over the next sort of, let's say, 5 years? Because there's a lot going on in terms of artificial intelligence. What does that actually mean? And whilst I understand artificial intelligence and certainly am embedding it here, I always think this is giving us opportunity to spend more time with people. So I'm looking at it as a marriage. But from your perspective, I'm just interested in where you think things are going over the next 5 years within the sort of financial sector.
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of things that come to mind. One of which was, I think, it's becoming harder and harder to market and differentiate ourselves, because it seems like everybody kind of does the same thing, seemingly. I think building a business is getting even a little bit harder today. I mean, it's not impossible, but it's different. It's harder than it used to be. But the one that I think about the most, because it's sort of in my wheelhouse, that's not necessarily breaking news to most people, is around this like continued advancement and proliferation of technology and the impact that that's going to have on really, like, not just the quality, not just the delivery of advice, but also the quality of advice. What I mean by that is essentially, like, as technology continues to grow and expand and accelerate, which, by the way, it does at an exponential rate, not a linear rate, and our brains don't really comprehend the exponential function, so it's probably going to happen. It's probably going to be faster and be far beyond what we really even expect or imagine. Well, actually, let me back up and say this. So that's sort of always been my belief. McKinsey and Company, a big consulting company, highly regarded over here in the U.S., they went and did it. They commissioned a study back in 2020 where they went and looked at the wealth management financial services industry, just to figure out what do we see in the next 10 years, where do we think it'll be by 2030. And I don't have the quote pulled up in front of me. Actually, I may have it on here, but the gist of it was this. They said that by 2030, essentially, advisors and advice they're going to be more like integrated life and wealth coaches that still do all the mechanics, but they're going to be more like life and wealth coaches, and that these firms and businesses are going to have to start rethinking their training programs to accommodate for it. And of course, I read that, and then I've got confirmation bias.
Yep.
And I'm just sitting here the whole time thinking, amen, you couldn't be more right. They're brilliant, right? But we've already seen it to some degree where technology is starting to come in and do some of the things that we say we do well, where we stake our value, and it does it faster, cheaper, and more reliably. Right. So it's like anytime something comes in and says, hey, I can do what you do faster, cheaper, and with less mistakes, it's like that's probably a threat. We should probably be aware of that. And I think that's only going to continue to, like, the technical knowledge is only going to be continue to become more and more of a commodity because it can be learned by a computer and by a machine. And so there's good and bad news with that. The bad news is that if you've staked your value on your technical knowledge and your ability to deliver technical knowledge, then it's not going to be much of a differentiator. And you're going to have people that can do it faster, cheaper, and more reliably eventually. Who knows when that is? We're not far from it, right? Like, I can get a free financial plan in 12 minutes. Is it as good as the one that the average advisor would give me? No, probably not. But I don't have to go talk to a stranger about my money. Right? So I think that's another factor. But ultimately, what the good news about it is that we can leverage the strength of the technology in the computer, let it do what it does best, and then ask ourselves, all right, if it's going to do that, the technical side, and also, by the way, it saves time automating some system work, tasks, some of the menial tasks you don't want to do, back office stuff. If it's going to do that, that frees me up to do more time, spend time doing other things. And you go, what are the things that a computer can't replicate? Well, it just so happens that the majority of those fall on the human side, right? Like, a computer can't replicate the ability to guide a couple through a conversation around why is it that you want to pay for college, but the other one doesn't? Why is it that you want to retire at 65 and the other one doesn't? And I'm not saying it can't do that. I think it can do an okay job, but it can't. It's still not the same as having a human being that's displaying empathy, guiding you through that conversation. A computer's not great at changing somebody's behavior, right? It can tell you what you need to do, but it doesn't do it. Can, and there are things they can deploy to improve behavior, but it's not great at that yet. So we can lean into the human side and then pair that with the technical side. And that's why I say it's not just about the delivery, but if we do that right, it'll improve the quality of advice because we have technology and humans both leaning into their strengths, which should mean we're delivering advice at a higher level.
I think it's a fantastic time to be a financial advisor. And I say this to all the ones that I meet. I genuinely believe that the advice sector, they're in a very privileged position that they can help people like me attain and achieve my outcomes more so than an accountant and lawyer. Okay, yeah. I have those guys, brilliant as they are, very technical, charge me a lot of money. But ultimately, these guys, I just think you're in a very privileged position. And I do think you are going into more of a, that sort of coaching and wealth role because the mechanics still need to be delivered, still need to reduce, the tax implications. But actually understanding people and getting us to act, I think is a privilege. I really do. And I think it's a great time to be an advisor. When I'm talking to all of them saying, this is your time. Use the technology, use the automation, embed it into your practices and your companies, but focus on the people. If you get that bit right, I think you're going to nail it.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, I aim into that. I think that's exactly right.
Okay. Right. I've got one final question for you. All right. I'm going to mix it up a little bit, Brendan, if I may, because you get to choose the question that you want to answer. All right.
Pick my own journey here.
Yeah. Let's see if I can get it right. Okay. So normally I ask my guests a question, but this time I'm going to let you choose the question. All right. So I'm going to give you the two options and then you choose which one you want to answer. Okay. So first question. What question do you wish I had asked today but didn't? Okay. That's number one. And the second one is, if you had a magic wand and you can change one thing, just one thing, what would it be?
Oh, man. If I had a magic wand and I could change one thing.
So that's question.
I think that's what I'm going with.
You're going to go with a magic wand?
Yeah, the one about what question do you... Nothing came to mind when you said that. I could probably come up with something, but okay, but if I could wave a magic wand and change one thing, I would create... No. Everybody would want to create more time. What I'm thinking about is this dynamic of like, I want my kids to grow up, but I don't want them to grow up. Like this is like the best. Like we love hanging out with them, love being with them, and don't like the conflicting pressure. Not pressure, but like the fact that there's only so much time in a day. and nobody's paying my bills for me, right? So I do have to work and like working and want to do good work, but I also want to be a great dad and a great husband. It's like you got all these things. I think what I would do is I'd wave a magic wand and say, I would like to spend, if we can't create more time, then I would like for there to be a recipe for how to do each one every single day and be able to be great at all of them. Okay, here we go. I'm processing, by the way.
Keep going,
my magic wand would be the cheat sheet for how to excel at business, being a dad, and being a husband in an hour a day. How about that? Like I can give an hour a day and then get the results that I want.
That's a great answer. That's great. That's fantastic. Yeah, I really like that. I think we'll do a bit of a montage when I get loads of these because it'd be interesting to see what people say over the next 12 months.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. And thank you for the answers. And I think that brings us to the top of the hour anyway. And I just wanted to say, Brendan, it's been an absolute pleasure meeting you today. Finally, to sit down, talk to you, get into your mindset, understanding that sort of human side. Yeah, it's been brilliant. You've been a brilliant guest. So thank you very much.
I'm going to go back and listen to all the past episodes to see if you say that at the end of every episode, just so you know. No, I'm just kidding. Thank you for thinking of me and reaching out and having me. This has been, I do a lot of these, and this one's been really fun and engaging. I really appreciate that.
And I'm sure you say that to everyone as well, Brendan. So
yeah, right. Yeah.
We've got the same script, yeah.
Nice. Well done. Yeah.
No, genuinely, thank you very much, Brendan. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.
Cheers.